Israel, 2001. The elusive quest for peace continues in the Holy Land. This Holy Land represents a religious and a socio-political center for millions of faithful worldwide. In the 4,000 years since Abraham walked this land, his Jewish and Arab descendants have not stopped fighting over it. Today, with the communication age upon us, the issues are as intense now as they were thousands of years ago.
In this program, called The 5 Deceptions of Islam, we introduce you to a topic that is essential for your understanding and your intercessory prayer. It is the life work of Victor Mordecai, a respected Israeli expert in the field of Islam and Muslim fundamentalism. This production gives an analysis of some of the spiritual reasons behind the horrendous attack on the World Trade Center in New York and the Pentagon in Washington. Victor Mordecai offers compelling proof that fanatic Islam is a threat to your world today. It is a major force of destabilization and violence that continually undermines all attempts at world peace.
Since the World Trade Center bombings in New York City on September 11th, and of course the attack on the Pentagon, there has been a very big question asked. What is Islam? Is Islam a religion which condones violence, or is Islam a religion which teaches peace? Unfortunately, there are a lot of factors in Islam that people do not understand, and the purpose of this video, the purpose of this teaching, is to show that there are 5 major deceptions in Islam which the West is not aware of. The first is that Islam is a religion of peace. The second, that Islam is a religion of love. The third is that Allah is just another name for God. The fourth, that Jesus Christ of Islam is the same Jesus Christ of Christianity. And of course, the fifth and final deception is that the Quran is a holy book written, or rather revealed directly to Muhammad from Allah, never touched by man, never edited, never changed. So these are 5 deceptions which I hope to dispel in the coming half hour. Firstly, Jews and Christians share a very, very important teaching about love. L-O-V-E. And of course in Deuteronomy 6, verses 4 and 5, as well as in Leviticus 19:18, these 2 commandments are the guidelines for the Judeo-Christian West. The first is, love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, with all thy mind, with all thy strength. And the second is, love thy neighbor as thyself. Now, in Mark 12:28-31, Jesus repeats these commandments for the Christians and, of course, for the Jews. He's repeating, like I said, Deuteronomy and Leviticus 19:18. These are the 2 most important commandments. There are no commandments greater than these 2, to love God and love thy fellow as thyself. Now, of course, in order to love God, you have to love your fellow as yourself, because all of us, all human beings, were created in the image of God. And if you hate your fellow, you cannot love God, because all your fellow people are created in the image of God. And so the teachings of the Bible are teachings of love the Lord thy God, Shema Yisrael, love the Lord thy God, love thy people, thy fellow as thyself. And these 2 commandments are not ever in the Quran. They are not in the Hadith. The Hadith is a teaching which came after the Quran, attributed to Muhammad himself. But these teachings do not appear at all in the Islamic religion. Are the Muslim people good people? Yes. Are they loving people? Yes. They are loving because they are human beings created in the image of God. But it is not in the teaching of Islam. You know, I as a human being, I myself as a Jew, used to have a very terrible feeling about German people because of the Holocaust and World War II. But I've come to the realization over the last few years that German people are good people. The problem in Germany is not the German people. The problem was Nazism. Similarly, the Russians are good people. The problem is not the Russians. The problem is communism. And of course, finally, the Arabs, the Iranians, all these different Islamic nations, they're good people. But their system is a Nazi communist system which is out to destroy those who do not follow that system, just as Nazism was, just as communism was. But the Muslims themselves are good, loving people. So are Muslims loving? Yes. Is their religion a religion of love? No. This is the first deception. The second deception is about peace, that Islam is a religion of peace. And they say, for example, that Dar es Salaam means the house of peace. Salam is like in Hebrew, the word shalom, meaning peace. But also has another meaning. And you know, in Hebrew and in Arabic and in every language, every word can have different meanings. So for example, the word salam means shalom, it means peace. But salam also means Islam. Now Islam does not exactly mean peace. Islam means pacification. It means submission, surrender to Allah. And we will discuss Allah in a few moments. But firstly, the word Islam means pacification, or forcing people to be pacified and to surrender to the Islamic system. The Islamic system teaches that there are two worlds. There is the world of Islam, and then there is the world of the infidel. The Muslims called the world of Islam the Dar es Salaam, which, by the way, is the name of the capital of Tanzania, Dar es Salaam, the House of Peace, or the House of Islam. And it's interesting that one of the bombs that destroyed an American embassy in Africa took place in Dar es Salaam. And what Americans and people in the world do not understand is that Dar es Salaam means the House of Islam. And the terrorists of the Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden, who blew up the American embassy in Dar es Salaam, were basically saying to America, Dar es Salaam means the House of Islam. There is no room here in Dar es Salaam for an American embassy, or a Christian embassy, or a Jewish embassy, or anything Western in the Islamic world. The world is divided into two. If you are not a Muslim, you are a part of the Dar al-Harb. Now in Hebrew, the word cherev means sword. The word harb in Arabic means war. If you are not a Muslim, you are a part of the house of war. If you are a pagan, if you are a Hindu, if you are a Buddhist, if you are a black, you are a pagan in the eyes of Islam, to be destroyed or converted forcefully to Islam. Now, if you are a Jew or a Christian, you are called a dhimmi. Dhimmi, D-H-I-M-M-I, means that you may be tolerated for the time being if you become subservient to Islam, if you serve the Islamic taskmasters. And this is indeed how Islam succeeded in conquering the world over 1,000 years ago, because the Jews and the Christians were not killed outright. The Jews and the Christians were allowed to remain Jews and Christians as long as they were subservient to the Islamic agenda. But the bottom line of Islam is that on the Day of Judgment, there will not be any peace on earth until all the Jews and the Christians, as well as the pagans, are terminated. Either they become Muslims or they are terminated. For the Jew, for the Christian, and for the Muslim, the Day of Judgment is rapidly approaching. And indeed, we see in the events of the last few weeks, since September 11th, we see killing of Christians taking place in every country of the world. We see, for example, in Kano, in the north of Nigeria, something that has been ignored by the media, and that is the killing of hundreds of African people who are not Muslim in the northern town of Kano. The fighting that has been going on all over the world, the persecution of Christians especially, has been rampant, and it has been basically ignored by the media. So the second deception of Islam, that Islam is a religion of peace, of course, is revealed in the fact that Islam will not have peace on the earth until the Jews and the Christians and the pagans are all gone. Now, even if all the Jews and the Christians and the pagans are gone, the utopia of Islam, and by the way, the word utopia in Greek, eutopia, means a place that cannot possibly exist. Let's look at the eutopia of Islam. The eutopia of Islam, basically, Afghanistan. Afghanistan is a typical example of a land in which you had Buddhists, you had Hindus, you had Jews, and you had Christians. Now, after the Buddhists and the Hindus, who were pagans, were destroyed, then the Jews and the Christians' turn came, and the Jews and the Christians were terminated in Afghanistan. Afghanistan today is a purely Muslim country, and yet the country has been riveted and riven into pieces for the last 30 years by civil wars in which Muslims have been killing Muslims. If you look, for example, at Algeria, you have over 100,000 dead Muslims in the last 6 years in a war that has nothing to do with Judaism or Christianity or Jews or Christians. The war in Algeria of the last 6-7 years is purely an Islamic war between Muslims and Muslims. And here we see terrible examples of Muslims hacksawing other Muslims to death and destroying them. And of course, the greatest example of the Islamic utopia is Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein, in the last 23 years that he has been in power, has killed over 2 million Muslims in wars, again, that had nothing to do with Judaism or Christianity. First, he had a war with Iran, in which over 1 million Muslims, innocent people, were killed, Iranians and Iraqis. Then he went into Kuwait. He killed another 1 million people, mostly Kuwaitis, Palestinians, Kurds, Shiites, and others. And of course, of his own family, of the Sunni Muslims of Tikrit, and his own cousin, his own sons-in-law. So Saddam Hussein is a perfect example of the Dar es Salaam, the house of peace, the house of Islam. The third deception, that Allah is just another name for God. I will show you in the next few minutes that Allah is not only God, Allah is Satan. And Allah cannot possibly be God. Because God says in the Bible that the Jews are the apple of God's eye. And in the New Testament, in Romans 9-11, the Christians are grafted into the apple of God's eye. The Christians are grafted into Israel. The Christians and the Jews are one unit, and especially in the eyes of Islam. Jews and Christians are not two different peoples, two different religions. For Islam, the Jews and the Christians are one religion, one people. We are the people of the Bible. We are the people of the book. And our God is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And the Messiah is a Jew who speaks Hebrew. For Islam, their God, Allah, is a God who says, we kill the Jews on Saturday, we kill the Christians on Sunday. When you listen to the preachings of the Islamic leaders in the mosques, especially on Friday, and we are taping today on a Friday in Jerusalem, the Mufti of Jerusalem and other Islamic leaders have said, kill the Jew, kill the Christian, kill the Israeli, kill the American, in one breath. This is a war against Judeo-Christianity. This is not a war just between Palestinians and Israelis. This is a war between the Islamic religion in every country of the world and the Judeo-Christian West. The Judeo-Christian West, of course, includes Israel, the United States and Canada, Latin America, Europe, Africa, Russia, Australia, and so this is now a global war. And I feel that September 11th was kind of like the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, with the difference that many, many more people died in New York City, and of course many more people will die now because of the asbestos lung infections and cancers they will get because of the collapse of the Twin Trade Towers. What happened in New York City was a Holocaust. And this is the beginning of World War III. I don't want to discuss too much in this presentation about American policy, but it's not going to be so simple just to go into Afghanistan and take out Osama bin Laden, because the Islamic terrorism is all over the world. And their God, Allah, has commanded them to wage jihad, to fight a holy war against the Jews and the Christians. This is in the Quran. It says in the Quran, in Surah 5, that you must wage jihad against the Jew and the Christian for the sake of Allah. And even though you might not want to fight, Allah knows what is good for you. And fighting is good for you, even if you don't think it's a good thing. And this is in the Quran. It says in chapter 5, verse 51 of the Quran, believers, Muslims, take neither the Jews nor the Christians for your friends. The Jews and the Christians are friends with one another. Whoever befriends the Jews and the Christians will become one of their number. Allah does not guide the wrongdoer. So Allah does not like the Jews and the Christians very much. And indeed, when we look a little bit at the Jewish and the Christian religions, and if we look, of course, at Islam, we will see certain differences which are irreconcilable. The first difference, of course, is that in Genesis, it says 4 times that God says to Abraham, it is through Isaac that your seed will be called. And yet Islam teaches that it is not Isaac as the chosen son, that it was Ishmael who was supposed to be sacrificed on the Mount of Moriah. But for Jews and Christians, it was Isaac. So one of the books is wrong, or God is a confused God. And I'm convinced that the Bible is right and that the Quran is wrong. Why did God choose Isaac? Why did God not choose Ishmael? Because Ishmael, it says in the book of Genesis, Ishmael will be a pere Adam. In Hebrew, pere Adam means a wild ass of a man, a wild donkey. His hand will be against all his brother's hands, and all his brother's hands will be against his hand, and he will dwell in the face of his brethren. And this is a biblical prophecy that we see happening today throughout the world, and especially in the Islamic world, where Muslims are even fighting each other non-stop. When Abraham sends Hagar and Ishmael away, God says, I will bless Ishmael, he will be the father of many nations, and he will be a man of the sword, meaning a man of war. Why didn't God allow King David to build a temple? Why was it King Solomon who built the temple? And the answer is because David was a warrior. He was a man of the sword, and he had blood on his hands. Whereas on the other hand, King Solomon made love, not war. So it was King Solomon who built the temple because King Solomon did not have blood on his hands. He was not a man of the sword. Ishmael, the father of Islam, is a man of the sword. He is a man of war. And if we look indeed at Allah, the God of Islam, Allah is just one of 360 pagan gods of ancient Mecca and Medina. And when Muhammad had his revelations supposedly from God, and he came to the Jews of Mecca, and he said that he was greater than Moses, and he came to the Christians, and he said he was greater than Jesus, and the Jews and the Christians sent him away. He came to the Arabian pagans and said, we must be like the Jews and the Christians. We must be monotheists. And so he destroyed 359 pagan gods of ancient Mecca and Medina, and he took Allah, who was the ancient moon god, war god, and sword god of the pagan Arabian pantheon, and he crowned Allah. The original name was Ilahi. Ilahi in Arabic means the moon god, the crescent god. Just as in Hebrew you have Elohim, which is God, and you have Elah. Elah means the moon or moon crescent. So similarly in Arabic, Ilahi is not God. Ilahi is the moon god, the war god, the sword god. And they adopted Ishmael as their forefather. So Ishmael is the war patriarch. So you have a war god, you have a war patriarch, you have a war messenger, Muhammad, and the greatest role model for Muslim children is Saladin, who is the war leader, the war role model for all Islamic children. He was a war hero. He defeated the Christian crusaders who were in the Middle East for 200 years. So the role model of all Islamic children is Saladin, because today the Islamic world teaches its children to kill and to be killed in the name of Allah. So Allah is not the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Allah is the God of Ishmael. You have a war god and a war patriarch and a war tradition. Another important thing to remember, there is a teaching in Islam known as the Hadith. The Hadith is a book of post-Quranic interpretations attributed to Muhammad. And there are two Hadith teachings that I wanted to share. And of course, they are in my book, Is Fanatic Islam a Global Threat? Firstly, on the Day of Judgment, you know, Jews and Christians are debating, is it the first coming or is it the second coming? But for Islam, they have a radically different viewpoint. On the Day of Judgment, the Jews will all be killed. And there will be some Jews who will temporarily escape their Muslim pursuers. They will hide behind rocks and trees. And on that day, Allah will give mouths to the rocks and trees, which will call out and say, "O Muslim pursuers, there is a Jew hiding behind me. Come and kill him." So Allah wants to see the Jews dead. So again, we have to ask the question, is God a confused God? How can it be in the Bible that the Jews are the apple of God's eye, and here Allah wants to kill the Jews? I say Allah is Satan. Allah is not God. The second teaching of Islam, which is for me will be the fourth deception, and it will link up with the third deception. The Muslims say to the Christians, yes, we revere Jesus of Nazareth. We revere him just like the Christians do. But there's a different Jesus in mind. The Jesus of Islam is a Muslim when he comes back the second time. And he comes back, he prays right behind me, here on the Temple Mount. He prays here at the Mosque of Omar with 400,000 Muslim believers. Then Jesus the Muslim comes down from the Temple Mount, breaks the crosses, destroys the churches of the Christians, destroys the synagogues of the Jews, and on that day of judgment, all the Jews and the Christians who have not embraced Allah and his greatest prophet Muhammad, all the Jews and the Christians will be put to the sword by Jesus the Muslim. This is the Islamic tradition. And indeed, Yasser Arafat in 1994, in the first Christmas in Bethlehem, that the PLO was there, he spoke in the Church of the Nativity, and he said that Jesus Christ was the first Palestinian Muslim revolutionary. This is not a figment of Arafat's imagination. This is sanctified in the Islamic religion, that Jesus comes back a second time as a Muslim. So when Muslims say to Christians, oh yes, we revere Jesus Christ also, Christians must be very aware and beware of counterfeits, because the Jesus of Islam is not the Jesus of Christianity. And Allah is not God, but Satan, who wants to see the Jews and the Christians dead. And this is the motive behind the destruction of the World Trade Center in New York City. and the other Islamic attacks, and the anthrax, all biological and chemical terrorism that we may see, and the shooting down of U.S. aircraft, which I think is yet to happen, shooting down of U.S. aircraft in many places in the world in order to paralyze the airline industry, in order to paralyze the tourism in America and everywhere in the world, in order to destroy the economy of America, and of course, by doing so, to destroy the economy of the world. This is the plan of Satan. And of course, the fifth and final deception of Islam is that the Quran is a holy book. And in my book, Fanatic Islam, on chapter 19, I discuss how the Quran was written by a rabbi who was kidnapped for that purpose by the nomads who were illiterate and needed a man of letters who could write a holy book for them. Now, if you go to the different Christian sects here in the Middle East, if you go to the Armenian church, if you go to the Syrian Orthodox church, they will tell you that the Quran was written by a priest from their respective sects. But the Jewish tradition, if you ask rabbis from the Middle East, rabbis from Iran, rabbis from Iraq, from Yemen, from Syria, from Egypt, from Morocco, even if you ask rabbis who come from Russia, many of these rabbis will tell you that the Quran was written not by a Muslim, because these Muslims were all illiterate nomads. The Quran was written by a rabbi. You will find in the Quran Talmud. You will find in the Quran Midrash. These are Jewish literary genres. Only a rabbi could have written the Quran. And the rabbi wrote the Quran with the self-destructive code of 19, the gematria of 19. And of course, Christians all know about the books of Grant Jeffrey, the signature of God in the Hebrew Bible, or the book by Drosnin about the Bible codes. Well, my book shows Satan's signature in the Quran. And indeed, there was a Muslim cleric who loved the Jews and the Christians. He lived in Tucson, Arizona. His name was Rashad Khalifa, and he was assassinated on January 30th, 1990 by hit teams sent from Afghanistan and from Pakistan to kill him. This, of course, is all in my book. The Quran has many, many elements in it which are absolutely Judeo-Christian. Of course, the rabbi who was kidnapped knew different languages, knew the different books, and was capable of writing a holy book for them, but the rabbi sabotaged the book in a catch-22 self-destruct system. And today, the Quran is being revealed for what it is, a cheap forgery and fabrication. And if you read the Quran, you will see that the Quran blesses the Jews and the Christians, then it curses the Jews and the Christians. Then it blesses the Jews and the Christians, and it curses the Jews and the Christians. The book is a book that makes no sense. The Quran is a book of gibberish. Unfortunately, a lot of the terrorism that we see today comes from the Quran. More of it comes from the Hadith, which teaches that the Jews must be killed on Saturday and the Christians must be killed on Sunday. And the only difference between Nazism and Islam is that the Nazis targeted the Jews. Islam targets the Christians and the Jews because according to the Islamic religions, the Jews must be killed on Saturday, the Christians must be killed on Sunday. And to kill the Christians everywhere in the world, basically you must destroy this earth. This is the fifth deception of Islam, that the Quran is a holy book. And in conclusion, I wanted to say the following. Satan hates the Jews because the Jews gave the Bible to the world. And Satan hates the Christians because the Christians preach the word of God to the world. And Satan hates the Muslims because the Muslims are good human beings created in the image of God. And any human being created in the image of God must be destroyed by Satan. And Satan will fight the Jews and the Christians to the last drop of Muslim blood because Satan rejoices at the death and destruction that Satan wreaks on the world, against the Jews first on Saturday and then the Christians secondly on Sunday. And of course, like I said before, the Muslims themselves are going to be led to destruction because Satan first deceives and then he destroys. And my prayer is indeed that the Jews and the Christians will be able to overcome 2,000 years of bad blood and misunderstanding, that we can learn to love each other, that Christians should love Christians and Jews should love Jews, and that Jews and Christians must learn to love each other, and we all together must love the Muslims, but we must show the Muslims that their God, Allah, is Satan, that their book is a forgery, and that the Muslims must come over to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and to the Bible. Otherwise, that religion, which teaches them of the ultimate victory of Allah over the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and of their book, the Quran, replacing the Bible, this can only lead to the destruction of this planet. And this is the final war, I believe, of civilizations between Islam and all the brethren of Islam, meaning the Hindus, the Buddhists, the Jews, the Christians on this planet Earth. This is the great battle. And I think that, Jews and Christians pray for the Messiah to come or return. I think that this is very close at hand now. I think God has chosen us as the generation that will be witnesses to the Messiah standing not far from us on the Mount of Olives. I just pray that we will all be alive together, including the Muslims, but the Muslims must shed the satanic faith of Islam and come over to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And I pray that it happen sooner than later, so that we do not have these terrible wars which are about to take place on this earth. May God bless Israel, may God bless the Christians, may God bless America and the world, and may God save all of us from the terrible tribulations that are at hand. Amen.
For further information on this subject, be sure to order Victor Mordecai's 2 gripping books called Is Fanatic Islam a Global Threat? And Christian Revival for Israel's Survival. Be sure to contact us by logging on to the internet at www.vicmord.com or by calling us at 1-800-540-0828.